What's up, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Sand Hill Road, the show where I talk to successful startup founders and their investors about the companies that they built and invest in. And the goal, like always, is to give you a sense of what it's like to be in their shoes, to understand how their businesses tick, how they got to where they are today, and to learn from their many successes and mistakes. We are recording this in very difficult times as the COVID-19 and Corona pandemic have spread from Asia to Europe to all over the world. In an unprecedented move to combat this crisis and to flatten the curve through social distancing, many companies over the last few weeks have moved to a work-from-home policy. And while front-end collaboration solutions such as Zoom and Slack have received much of the public attention over the last few weeks, we shouldn't forget that the public cloud and its enabling solutions are really backstopping this entire shift to remote work. In other words, cloud infrastructure providers are really an unsung hero in enabling social distancing and allowing us to work from home and flatten the curve. And my guest today is a thought leader in exactly this vertical. I'm talking to Moisey Uretzky, the co-founder of DigitalOcean.
What? How is this possible?
To be clear, this is not a sponsored episode, but from my personal experience of building and launching web apps, DigitalOcean has always been my cloud provider of choice. At one point, my startup even went through the DigitalOcean Hatch program, whereby DigitalOcean gifted us $30,000 in server credit, which is obviously hugely helpful to any early stage startup. And in fact, in competing with the larger tech giant cloud providers, such as Amazon's AWS and Google's GCP, DigitalOcean has really made a name for itself in supporting early stage startups and smaller businesses.
We started signing up 2 users a day in March 2012, and 2 years later, we're signing up nearly 1,000 customers a day. DigitalOcean started in New York City in 2011. When we first started the company, we were just 4 co-founders with a big vision. And over the last 18 months, we've been able to grow to a company with over 50 employees.
DigitalOcean is a simple cloud hosting provider built for developers.
The company has so far raised $123 million from VCs such as IE Ventures and Andreessen Horowitz and Access Technology Ventures. It is currently on an expected $300 million annual run rate, and it has done so without raising any equity since 2015. Instead, the company has scaled by using almost $300 million in venture debt. And in this session, we will cover Moisey's entrepreneurial journey.
When you have constraints, it really forces your creativity. Had I not taken that car out, had I not had to make that payment, I probably would have said, okay, it's not meant to be, let's move on.
Including his relationship to his brother and co-founder Ben.
The best lottery ticket you could ever get in life was being interested in computers in an early age in the 1990s.
The product and funding journey, and we'll learn something about his outlook on the cloud infrastructure space. But let's hear it from Moisey himself, and let's jump right in. Welcome everybody to another episode of Sand Hill Road, and I'm really honored today to be joined by Moisey Uretzky, who's the co-founder of DigitalOcean, a product that everybody in the indie hackers community and developer community loves. Really excited to have you here with us, Moisey. You ready to take it from the top?
Yeah, absolutely. Really excited to be here and look forward to it.
So,
fire away.
Before I want to jump into the DigitalOcean story, I want to take a bit of a walk down memory lane and talk about your early beginnings. So you and your co-founder, Ben, who's your brother as well, you came to the US when you were 5 from Russia, I think. And so in many ways, you're the classical first-generation immigrant family success story, right? Talk to us a little bit about these early beginnings and how this prepared you for your later entrepreneurial journey.
It's a twisted tale that's all interconnected. But yeah, I mean, we immigrated to America. We were about 5 years old, so we didn't have much choice in the matter. And our family is from Russia. Our father was the one who really drove that process to get us here because, he saw America is the land of golden opportunity. It's a cliche, but that's what he heard. And, we left actually the Soviet Union before it had collapsed and turned into Russia today and all the other neighboring countries. And so his knowledge of America was really based on some books that he read that were from the 1950s. So it was a bit of a culture shock for him to get to America and realize that there was a bit of a disconnect between what he read about 1950s and 60s America versus the one that we found in the late 80s and early 90s. Um, I think for us, what was really critical is that our family was always big on education. Our grandmother had played a tremendous role in that. She was the head of pediatrics, so taking care of the most seriously ill kids. And she was also a great student her entire life. She started off being a pathologist, which is a very skittish job, but she basically did it because she wanted to learn. And she felt that if she could understand why people passed away and do all the autopsies, she would learn a tremendous amount about how to help cure people. And then when she started her career in pediatrics and head of infectious diseases, all of the medical journals that would arrive to her hospital, she would be the first one to take them, read them, and then give them back to everybody else. So she definitely instilled this thirst for knowledge in us, as well as our dad. She was kind of the carrot. Our dad was kind of the stick. So from a very early age, we just had education and reading kind of ingrained in us. And then, fortunately and unfortunately, our parents got divorced. So that was definitely a tough time for us. But the benefit was that we had got our first computer, and so what does a depressed, lonely kid do but go on the internet? So that's how it kind of all worked out. I think somebody tweeted, I don't remember who it was, that the best lottery ticket you could ever get in life was being interested in computers in an early age in the 1990s. So I think definitely that had played a tremendous role because this wasn't something that I sought out. It was just something that was part of my life growing up. So there was not really a transition there. That kind of carried out further from there.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I'm always interested to find out where people get their early intellectual curiosity. And then, like any good Russian, you go on and study mathematics at NYU. And I think you've talked about this in the past, that this has really taught you first principles thinking, not just thinking about what's 1 + 1, but really what does a number mean, and that this has really shaped also your business mind. Talk to us a little bit about that.
I did study mathematics because I liked it. I had a really bad guidance counselor who said I was taking a lot of math courses. Why don't I study mathematics and make that my major? That's not great career advice. And for the first half of mathematics was stuff that you were used to. You're playing with numbers, you're doing calculus and all that like that. And then I took this course, which was algebra. And I didn't understand what they meant by algebra. I thought it was the old algebra. This was actually the foundation of mathematics algebra, where numbers don't exist and you have to create numbers out of nothing. And that was a very challenging class. I think my first test, I think I failed my first test. I haven't failed a math test my entire life, and I failed. And I said, "Oh my goodness, this is something different." But about halfway through that course, my mind kind of clicked into this proof and logic structure. And that definitely did help me to understand just how to ask questions, how to make proofs, and just how to kind of question everything and kind of build it up from there. Because when you don't have even the luxury of 0 or 1 or 2 or plus or minus, you really are starting from nothing. And in many ways, building a company, it's very much the same thing where there's some ideas that you have, there's definitely knowledge out there, but you still have to build it from the ground up. And even when you have the right idea, people say oftentimes the idea is not as essential as building the business behind it. And I just see that a lot of just how do you create those principles, whether it's product principles, culture, just pretty much any part of your business. How do you build a structure, a foundation for it, and how do you expand on it so it's not just stuck in your head, but something that other people can follow and utilize and also benefit from?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. DigitalOcean wasn't really your first startup. Most famously was obviously ServerStack, which you co-founded with your brother Ben, and which was later merged into DigitalOcean. But before that, you also had a fintech startup, which was catering to hedge funds and fund of funds. And so talk to us about these startups before DigitalOcean and how this really shaped you as an entrepreneur.
ServerStack was the first one. And, the company that we were working for went out of business, and we basically did the same thing and started our own business. And the founding journey there was interesting. It was quite a few challenges. I think there's so many different lessons that you can learn from it, but I think one of them is if you can get the right team of people together, even if it's just two people, it doesn't matter if it's three, four, five, but just having more than one person in the room is critical. Because when we first started ServerStack, we got all of these servers, we went to a data center, we set them up, we got everything connected, and then we tried to get a network online. And in those days, networking was challenging. It was kind of like playing Nintendo, and you had to blow on the cartridges and put them in just right. Well, fiber optics and networking was kind of the same. Things wouldn't work, and you wouldn't know why. And we actually failed to get the network online. So we actually took all the servers out. We put them back in the trunk of the car. We drove all the way home back to Brooklyn. And Ben told me, Moisey, don't worry about it. I got some cash saved away. We'll go on vacation. We'll figure out our next move. We got to the house, and I had just quit my job. I had just dropped out of school. And stupidly or not stupidly, I had also got my first car that I took out on a lease, and I was paying for the lease and the insurance. And as we're driving home, the entire time, I'm panicking, thinking, I've been so good about making sure not to overburden my mom with any of my finances. Now I'm going to be out of a job, and who is going to pay for my car and my insurance? There's no way in hell that I could go back to my mom and tell her, hey, I have no income. Can you pay for my car? So the entire ride home, I was thinking about that. And I realized that there was one customer who I knew really well, that if I could just get her set up online, that one server, I could make enough money to pay for the car. So I told Ben, said, hey, why don't we just take that one server, bring it to a friend's data center because they have all the networking taken care of. I'll get the server online, and then I could pay for my car. And Mom and I don't want to let my mom down. And then Ben's looking at me and he says, wait a minute, if we could set up one server at a friend's data center, why don't we take all the other servers as well and set them up? So we had already emailed the customers telling them we can't get you online. We emailed them back and said, no, never mind that email. 3 hours later, we'll have you online. So we got them online and ServerStack was born. And I think that's an important lesson in life is basically twofold. One, if it was either just me or Ben, we would have both quit for our different reasons. But the two of us together, when one person couldn't see a way out, the other person had, was thinking through the problem. And I think also, this is something that people talk about frequently, but when you have constraints, it really forces your creativity. Had I not taken that car out, had I not had to make that payment, I probably would have said, okay, it's not meant to be, let's move on. But because I needed to take care of that financial responsibility, I had to figure a way out. And wouldn't you know it, we found one. So I always say that some of my best decisions come from some of my worst decisions. Usually when I get financially too exposed, then the creativity comes in and then I have to figure it out. So that was definitely a big lesson, one of many that we learned there. And then the second company, it was really about getting back to engineering and writing code because I kind of got away from that, becoming a manager. And I kind of realized a couple of things. Number one, no matter how much I love to code, I had to be realistic. I hadn't spent the last 10 years doing it, so I was never going to be great at it. And I just had to let that kind of go by the wayside. But it was also interesting to learn about a business that was completely different from what I had been exposed to. And I think that also taught me that I'm probably best in a secondary role where I don't have to have the idea. Somebody else can have the idea, but I just have to absorb it and then I can execute on it. And that's kind of been the history throughout. And the same thing with DigitalOcean. It was really a direction that Ben wanted to push in. And then when the stars aligned, then we can execute out of it. So I think it's about understanding your own strengths and weaknesses as a person. And I think that's really the key to building a great co-founding team is not really to do everything yourself, but to know where you're weak and bring other people in. And it's not about accepting your weakness. It's just about playing to your strengths and realizing that no company in the world is going to be $1 billion company with one person. So you're always going to end up in a team structure. So understanding where your best fit is early probably gets you there faster.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And it's a perfect segue to talk about the early days of DigitalOcean and about the team. So you had a total of 5 co-founders. Obviously, there was you and Ben, and then there was Mitch Weiner, Jeff Carter, and Alec Hartman. And so it's been reported that you met Mitch Weiner through Craigslist. He answered a Craigslist ad. And I think I read it somewhere else that Jeff Carr also answered a Craigslist ad when you recruited him for Server Stack. And so what about Alec Hartman? It seems like Craigslist is the place to go to look for co-founders, which probably, I'm not sure everybody would agree with this.
It worked for us. So I think the chronological order of meeting the co-founders. So I actually met Alec first, and this was when I was doing Core Group, the fintech startup. I was responsible for a lot of back-end code about just cleaning up the data and managing it. And we had an intern from my old high school who had gone on to college at Cornell who was building the front end in Rails. And no matter how hard I tried to convince him to drop out, he never agreed to it. So he stayed at Cornell. Now he's at Facebook. He's doing well, so that's fine. So after he decided not to drop out, I kind of inherited the entire code base. And I just didn't feel that I was familiar enough with Rails to just really own the entire process and now start selling this product to businesses. So I went on Google. I typed in Rails Consulting New York City. The first result that I got was this company in New York City on Rails or something like that. And I called the phone number. This gentleman, Alec, picked up the phone. And I told him, this is a bit of a weird request. I don't really have a project that I need you to code, but what I would like is for you to come into the office to help me learn Rails a little bit so that I could get more comfortable with it. And Alec, to his credit, he said, yes, that is a unique request. I've never heard that one before. And yeah, okay, I'll come by. Yeah, let's try it. Let's see what happens. So he came by the office. We spent a couple of days together. We went through the code. He basically told me, look, you kind of know what you're doing. Definitely you need more practice. But, feel free to reach out if you need some help, you get stuck anywhere. And we kind of left things there. And that was, that kind of sat on the side for a few months. Then Jeff reached out on Craigslist to an ad that we had for a system administrator. And we learned early on in our hiring that there's a lot of biases that you have when you hire people that you might not be exposed to, but we all have them. And what we decided is that we always want to do a homework assignment before we really talk to the person, because I don't want my bias of that individual, whether conscious or subconscious, to play into how good they are at their job. And so we sent him this homework assignment, and he gave it back to us, and he got 100 on it. And it's impossible to get, it's not impossible, but it's very, very unlikely to get 100. It was basically you take everything from one virtual server and you move it to another one. And you can do a great job, but you'll always forget something. You'll forget a cron tab. You'll forget one little mistake here or there. And so he got 100. So we're like, what? How is this possible? And then I looked at his resume and saw what he was doing. And he happened to have been at GoGrid before, which was another cloud back in the day. So I was like, wow, this is interesting. I got to talk to this guy. What's going on over here? So we set up a phone conversation. Actually, set up it was Skype, or I don't know what we did back then for video conferencing. And so we got on, we started chatting. We spent about 20 minutes talking about engineering and all this and that and the other thing. And the next probably 40 minutes just joking around like two brothers from another mother, just instant compatibility. And I came back to Ben and I said, hey, Ben, look, we got this guy, Jeff. He's great. So between him and Alec, we can now build DigitalOcean. So that's how Jeff got hired. And unbeknownst to us at the time, Jeff actually had no interest in staying with us. He signed up because his girlfriend at the time was doing a PhD in New York City. So he had to move from California to New York. So he figured he'd do a couple of months and then kind of go on his way. And instead, he kind of fell in love with us and the company. We went over from there. And then Mitch came on board because we were funding all of DigitalOcean from ServerStack, so we still had to operate that business. So we were looking for somebody to basically lead the charge in marketing at ServerStack. And again, Craigslist was the place we went to look for a marketer. And it's really hard to find somebody who understands marketing and has also been a developer, written any amount of code. So he came up over there, and that seemed like the right person to hire for ServerStack, and then eventually integrate into DigitalOcean. So that was kind of how the founding team came together. Google, Craigslist, and needing to learn how to write Ruby on Rails code.
That's great. That's great. And so let's talk a little bit about the DigitalOcean MVP. So you started out in summer 2011 working on the MVP, and I think you launched the beta in January of 2012. You didn't charge clients until March of 2012. And by this time, you already had 50 to 60 clients. So I assume that some of these clients were previous clients from ServerStack, or how did you get to these first 50 and 60 clients?
Actually, none of them were from ServerStack. So yeah, we started writing code in June 2011, and then I think somewhere around December, Ben, he comes in as the CEO. He's the CEO. He's my older brother, obviously. So he comes in and he says, "You guys have been writing code for 6 months. Are you going to ship anything?" And we said, "Oh, no, he has a point. We should probably ship something and see if anybody likes this." So we launched the beta in January of 2012, and we just did everything possible to get people to use it. We were actually in the precursor to WeWork, which is now a bit of a controversial name in the space, but we were in their first co-sharing, co-working space, which was called Green Desk. That was their MVP.
I remember it's the one that Adam Newman sold as like the first proof of concept. Yeah.
So we were one of the first tenants in Green Desk, and we also helped them a lot with their networking. So we would actually put up flyers in the elevator that said, "Hey, we're DigitalOcean, sign up." So we just did everything possible. We did some of that, some Google AdWords, just basically everything under the sun to kind of get our name out there. And it was definitely slow going. We got a couple of customers here and there. We did a lot of things focused around meetups, anything related to any sort of tech conference that was in New York. We would do that as well. And that's also where, our interest in Techstars came from, because, the real thing between ServerStack and DigitalOcean was that with ServerStack, we just kind of started a business out of necessity to pay bills. And the entire time that we were building that business, our dad was telling us, if he was running the business, it would be 10 times larger. And I always, said to myself, like, under my breath in my head, obviously not to his face, F you, Dad, you don't even know what the internet is. How would you do a 10 times better job? I mean, he didn't know what the internet was. He was using a lot of eBay for his own business. But the general sentiment was, you don't understand developers. How could you do a better job than us? And that worked for about 5 years. And then when you got to be about 25, the testosterone drops and your ears open up. You stop thinking that you know everything. And I realized that I don't think he would do a better job, but he does have a point. I don't know what the hell I'm doing, so let me read some books. So that's when we started to read books, and that became the foundation of DigitalOcean, was, taking all of the mistakes that we made that now we know were mistakes because of the books that we read, and now doing the right thing for DigitalOcean. And that was the same thing that we decided early on, is that we want to do things differently. So the first business was a service business. We want to make sure we have a product business. We didn't raise any venture capital. We didn't have a network. We didn't have advisors. So we wanted to make sure that we had a network. We had advisors. We had mentorship. So that if we were going to make mistakes, we would prefer that they would be new mistakes rather than rehashing the same mistakes we made before. And that's where our interest in Techstars came in. And yeah, it was pretty slow going. Like, you would have a trickle of customers here and there, but nothing that you would call product market fit until January. Everything else was just more effort than the result you were getting. Whether that was spending more money than getting a return, or just chasing down every single person on Twitter or Hacker News, or writing up a bunch of blog posts, just doing anything under the sun to kind of get your name out there, and realizing that none of it is working.
Yeah, and so I want to drill a little bit into your first major product iteration in January 2013, when you decided to release the first SSD plan. And it was really quite unique at this time. You were keeping it at the same price point as before, $5 per month. And there was a TechCrunch article, and it really blew up on Hacker News, and it basically catapulted your sign-up rates from 2,000 clients in January to 150,000 clients in December, I think.
Like 1,000 stars.
When you wake up and you look at the numbers and you're like, wow, what the hell just happened last night? It's an out-of-body experience.
Your decision to pioneer this product was a rather risky one, because you basically put all the money on one horse, which was a very uncertain horse. And I think there was some controversy also in the team of following this plan. Talk to us a little bit about this decision.
Yeah, so basically we had graduated Techstars. We tried to raise a seed round, and we really didn't get too far. It was very tough. And we were raising like a 500K seed round, and Ben kind of came in and said, look, we've spent probably $1 million of our own money. Another 500,000 isn't really going to move the needle for us, so let's just scrap that. So we did. And then it was basically the one thing that kept us going, or at least kept me going, was that when we first built DigitalOcean and I got to launch the first droplet, my immediate reaction was, oh my God, I want to quit my job and just spin up a bunch of Rails servers so that I could launch more droplets. And sure, I was the founder, so maybe my impression of the product is a little bit skewed, but we had that same expression from the early customers that we had, that they really loved what we were doing. So that was our method for going forward, is that it's very, very hard to get somebody to love your product. They can like it, they can certainly hate it, that's pretty easy. But to get somebody to express that really strong sentiment of love is actually very challenging. So if we achieve that, then we have something special here. And since we had that thing that was special, the next question was obviously, okay, well, we have this, we think it works well. The customers that we have, they do love what we're doing. We just don't have enough customers. And we can't advertise our way into more customers because it's very, very expensive. And because we didn't raise $5 million, we couldn't just blow a bunch of VC capital to raise money, which again, constraints are good. And so basically I'm sitting on my laptop and I'm thinking about, okay, I know that Hacker News is the community that we need to be on, but Hacker News, you have no advertising. So if you have a message that's worthwhile, the community thinks is important, they'll upload it. So I'm sitting on my laptop thinking of, okay, what can we do that would really create some interest from the Hacker News community? And that's like what all of our blog posts were about. We're trying to do cool stuff, but none of it worked. So I'm sitting on this laptop and I look at it and I think to myself, well, my laptop has SSD drives. And in Server Stack, remember we had a database server that was overloaded because we were a managed web hosting provider. We would work with our customers to help them to improve their performance. And it was really tough because oftentimes there was like a customer and a team of developers and they were kind of disjoint. So we really kind of had to work around those constraints. So the easiest way for us to improve a database server that was overloaded was basically to just migrate it onto the same exact server that had SSD drives. Because they were so much faster, you would get back probably 80% of your performance. So you went from a server that was dying to one that was 4x under capacity. So I'm sitting there on my laptop and I'm thinking, I have SSDs in my laptop. Over here, I'm trying to build the future cloud, and my future cloud is technically less powerful than my laptop. And my laptop, I mean, this was still early days. Laptops were not exactly yet the preferred way to do your work. So this little portable thing is better than my cloud. So I came to Jeff and I told him, hey, I want to put SSDs in the cloud. And Jeff got super excited. He said, well, I could do this faster and that faster, because really there was so many things you could do with a higher performance that would actually make his job a lot easier. And then he said to me, well, you know, we have a bunch of RAM left over. And I said, okay, well, let's double the RAM, because these servers are going to be so expensive that the RAM becomes almost inconsequential. We're going to spend twice as much money just on the hard drives as the entire server. Who cares about this extra RAM? Just give it to the customers, make them happy. And then we said it's going to be $5 because $5 foot-long Subway sandwiches. Because it's a good price point, you know, $5 is a good place to start to trial something out and see if it fits for you. $20 is, you know, it's not expensive, but it's a bit of a barrier. So I came to Ben and I said, here's what we're going to do. He looks at me, he says, you're crazy. If this doesn't work, you know, we have to kill this idea because it's just too expensive. So we spent the next 3 months buying a bunch of SSD drives. We had to buy drive bays from eBay because Dell would not sell us the drive bay by itself. They wanted you to buy a hard drive, and their hard drive prices were ridiculous. We bought all of these drive bays. We bought all of these SSD drives. We sat in the office. We screwed them all together. We took 3 months to just put enough inventory into the cloud so that we could be an SSD-only cloud. And every customer that was signing up basically between September till January was actually going on SSD hardware without knowing it. And then Mitch got us a TechCrunch article through his friend John Edgar, and that was basically how we entered the scene. And you know, TechCrunch picked it up, and Hacker News picked it up, and the community really loved it, and it just kind of snowballed from there. And we went from, you know, a no-name company to, like you said, having over 100,000 customers by the end of that year. That was definitely product market fit.
That's when you can tell that you have product market fit, when there's so much pull from the market. So I mean, I personally, I've been a huge fan of DigitalOcean ever since I spun up my first droplet. And I've also been lucky to go through the DigitalOcean Hatch program. So I owe you $30,000 in server credit. Although I don't think we used it all, but we used a good chunk of it. So thank you for that. So I want to segue a little bit to the funding journey. So I think you originally applied to Techstars, to the New York batch, and got rejected there as they couldn't really wrap their head around the cloud infrastructure space. And then through an introduction of Jason Seeds, you went through their Boulder, Colorado program. Talk to us a little bit about this time.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely wanted to build a network and just have other people outside of ourselves to get advice from. And we never really took Y Combinator seriously, not because we didn't think they were great, but just because we were living in New York, our family is in New York, our business is in New York, we were running another business. So the last thing we wanted to do was move to California for even 3 months. So we applied to Techstars in New York City, and David Tisch was running the program, and he's a really smart guy. We were rejected from being a finalist. Then Ben emailed them to make us a finalist. Then we went to the finalist selection. We still got rejected. Then we sent him a really funny video about why we shouldn't be rejected. And ultimately, he basically said to us, look, I think you guys are great, but I'm not an end user for your product, so I don't think I just don't get it. It's not that you're bad, it's just that it doesn't connect with me. But let me send you over to Boulder. Then we went over to Boulder, had to go through this whole process again. And then Jason Seeds got involved, who was obviously the co-founder of SliceHost. And we love SliceHost. And we always joke that DigitalOcean is SliceHost 2.0. And maybe if SliceHost didn't sell to Rackspace, that there would be no room for DigitalOcean. And at first, he really didn't get, like, how are these guys going to do this? They didn't know what they're doing. And we had so many mix-ups in all the meetings that we were all kind of from different time zones between Nicole from Techstars and Jason and us. So we would always have like one meeting with one person that was missing, then another meeting with the other person. And then finally at the end, when we're all together, we're having this final interview. We look at each other saying, Jesus Christ, this is going pretty bad. And then somewhere in the middle of it, Ben just says, we are running another hosting company that is doing like $5 million in revenue and has servers in 3 locations across the world. And all of a sudden, Jason says, oh, you guys know what you're doing then yeah, it's fine. Okay, these people know what they're doing. They're not just crazy. And so we got accepted, and that's how we got in. So it's just another one of those odd circumstances of just always pushing. There was never an answer of yes from the start. It was always you had to fight for the yes. Every from the start of even Techstars, there was no one who said, yes, let's do it.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And funnily enough, like I always had you down as a YC company because Mitch Weiner actually went on this early YC podcast, Startup School Radio, back in 2015, I think. I later learned that you were actually, one of the poster child companies of Techstars. So let's talk a little bit about the Series A, which you raised from IA Ventures, because you had this prior relationship. So talk to us a little bit about this.
Yeah, so Brad from IA Ventures, it was actually the Series Seed. So we had 3 rounds, Series Seed and B. And so Brad, I and Brad met actually through the other company, Core Group, which was the fintech startup that we were doing. And it was a pretty simple process of meeting. Again, a lot of no's. The recurring theme. Basically, when somebody says no, try not to listen too hard. But we were building this company. We wanted to raise some money. So we basically just went on Google. Again, common theme, Google, Craigslist. And we just typed in VCs in New York, again, because we didn't want to get on a plane and go somewhere. That also happened to be in the fintech space. One of the biggest names in the fintech space in New York City was IA Ventures. And again, this was 2011 or 2010. So the VC landscape in New York was much different than it is today, much smaller. But we reached out, and it's just so funny in hindsight because we sent him a business plan, not a pitch deck, but a 25-page business plan. So I think about that, just, oh my goodness, this is the kind of things that you do when you have no outside mentorship or whatever else. So we sent him this 25-page business plan. He went through it. He politely declined to meet with us. So of course we didn't take no for an answer. So I reached back out to him and I said, hey, I know you said no, but I'd love to at least give you a demo of the product. And to Brad's credit, he basically responded and said, look, I don't think that you are a fit for us, but I'm always happy to see a demo because that's just the kind of person he is. Like he's not just, a lot of VCs have different reputations, but he's just a good guy. So he saw a company, an upstart in New York, put a lot of work in. The least he could do is see what we're doing and give us some advice. So that's how we actually met. I came to his office, I gave him a demo. He said, hey, look, it looks like some interesting stuff, but we're kind of a little bit challenged in the fintech space because the customer acquisition cost is very high, either from the consumer side or from the B2B side. So I think you're going to run into challenges over there, but see how it goes. And ultimately, he was right. The adoption was challenging. So after we started to build DigitalOcean, he was obviously my first call because he was the only VC that I knew. So we reached out and said, hey, can I give you a demo? I built something else. And he's like, yeah, of course, come by the office, give us a demo. So we came by, and I remember the original website was pretty bad because I built it, and it was just, we had a piggy bank, and it was just a bunch of stock art, and there was a big wave in the background. So we took him to the demo. He said, look, this is pretty interesting. I don't know how you're going to compete with Amazon and all the big players. And at that point, we were following the age-old advice, if you want money, just ask for advice. So we really were just using that as an opportunity to get our name into the Techstars network. So we said, hey, what do you think about Techstars? We knew that they were actually an investor in Techstars. So that kind of gave us a foot in the door with Techstars. And then basically from there on in, I would just follow up with him every week, 2 weeks, or 3 weeks, and just send him an update on the business. Here's what we're doing. Here's what we launched. Here's a meetup that we did, and just kind of kept them informed. And at every stage, it was just not the right fit, not the right fit. And then once we got product market fit, that was the email that got their attention because, I mean, the revenue was substantial. So the revenue climbed rather quickly. So I sent him an email and said, hey, here's where we're at. And unlike the typical response that usually happened pretty immediately or within a day, this one took a couple of weeks, and I was really surprised. I thought we were doing pretty well. And he got back to us and said, oh, wow, this sounds really interesting. You guys should come by the office. Let's dig into this a bit further. And so we came to their office in New York City, and we said, before we start, we need to understand that, it's been 3 weeks and we've grown 66%. So at that point, his eyes lit up, like, wow, okay. And, so from there, the seed round went really easily, but that's after Ben was talking to probably 40 or 50 angels for an angel round, and after 2 years of knowing this person, and after a year and a half of pitching him DigitalOcean every day. So then the seed round was pretty easy. But that's because all of the no's and all of the hard work that went into it beforehand.
Yeah, that's super interesting that you built this relationship so far ahead of time that you even started it with the prior startup. And then let's talk about the next funding round, which you raised from Andreessen Horowitz. And there's an interesting story. I think the pitch took place shortly before Thanksgiving. Peter Levine, A16 said, kicking back his legs and not really paying attention for most of the pitch until Ben really said, like, are you getting this? I think that was the story. Talk to us a little bit about how you got to pitch Andreessen Horowitz in the first place and how this meeting went.
I think that was definitely the power of the network. So after we raised our Series C, we pretty quickly, within a couple of months, realized that it was just not going to be enough money because we were growing so rapidly. And we just need to purchase so much more inventory of servers to really continue to provide customers with basically droplets that they needed. So we decided, hey, we have a pretty good network now in New York. We know the players here. We have Techstars, but it would be nice to have somebody from the West Coast, right? And so basically we sat down, and Crunch Fund, by the way, also invested in us during the seed round. So we had, Michael Angton and Crunch Fund, and we had Techstars, and we had, Brad from IA Ventures, and we said, okay, let's put a list of the top 10 VCs on the West Coast. So we had all the big names, Sequoia and Axel and Bessemer, there's Horowitz, Greylock, there's basically everybody there. And we basically asked the network, hey, who can get us an intro to all of these different VCs? And we got a list going together. We put together a pitch deck. We sent it out. And we basically got a meeting with each one of them. And so we scheduled 4 days to fly to the West Coast and pitch all of them in 4 days. And it was a little bit surreal because you basically go to pitch one VC in the morning, and you go to some building in Silicon Valley, and you go left down one corridor in the morning, and then in the evening you're coming back and you're going right because they're all, we're in a couple of block radius of each other, sometimes in the same building but different wings of it. And yeah, Andreessen Horowitz is actually our last meeting. Turned out later on, you hear all the inside stories, but Andreessen had accepted the meeting, but it was unclear which partner was going to take it. And Peter happened to be in the building, so they asked him to take the meeting, and he said, "Okay, I'll do it because I don't want to ruin our reputation that we accepted a meeting and we have nobody here. That'll look really bad." And so yeah, we came in, we're doing the pitch. Peter is sitting, his legs are kicked up. He looks like he's not paying attention. He's obviously on our board now. And then we learn he actually does pay attention. That's just his personality. He's just very laid back, but he's super smart. He hears everything, he gets it. And halfway through the meeting, probably me and Mitch are probably arguing about something, and Ben turns and says, "Hey guys, can you stop arguing? Do you see that Peter's not buying this?" And Peter says, "Oh, it's not that I'm not buying it. I just never thought that a little startup would try to go after Amazon and be in any way successful." But from there, it's interesting because again, it's never a yes. So that meeting went really well, but it really wasn't the catalyst to get their investment. We kept pitching other firms, and we had started to get some interest from different VCs. But the two partners that we really liked the most were Jerry Chan from Greylock and Peter Levine from Andreessen. And I think this goes back to that important notion of make sure you get the right people on board because, yeah, they happen to be great names in the space, but really it was just the partners that we spoke with and that we really connected with. Jerry Chan was from VMware, super smart guy, tremendous amount of energy. And Peter Levine had invested in GitHub and he'd done XenSource, so he definitely understood our space and the importance of developers. And basically, Ben got a partner pitch at some VC firm on the West Coast, and he came over to me and said, "Hey, Moisey, you got to do this whole partner pitch at some VC firm." And I asked him what name, and I don't remember the name now. So obviously, and I said, "Hell no, I'm not getting on a plane." I had a big fear of flying. Now it's less. Like, hell no, I'm not getting on a plane for those guys. I'm not going. So then Ben goes to Mitch, says, "Mitch, we got to get on a plane to go to the West Coast to pitch these VCs." Mitch is always Mr. Positive. Say, "Yes, all right, let's do it. Let's get on the plane." So they fly out to the West Coast. They pitch these guys on Monday. They're about to get an Uber to drive back to the airport, fly back to New York. And then Ben stops and says, "You know what? This is bullshit. We're not going to fly back to New York. We're going to get an all partner meeting with Andreessen Horowitz. We're going to pitch these guys, and we're going to tell them why should they invest in us." Meanwhile, they're over there in California on Monday. They had a flight out in the morning, a flight back in the evening. They have no clothes. But they decide to stick around. They check into a hotel, they buy some clothes, and they start just emailing Peter saying, "Hey, we're in town. Let's get a meeting together, blah, 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 blah." Anyway, somehow Ben pulls his magic that he normally does. He gets an all-partner meeting with Andreessen Horowitz because we happen to be in town, does the pitch, and that's kind of when the wheels start to fall into motion. They get really interested, and that's how we eventually get to having them as an investor.
There's been a lot of talk about venture debt. If I look into your funding history, one thing that's really striking, DigitalOcean hasn't raised any money since the Series B in 2015 and has heavily relied on non-dilutive venture debt, raising almost $300 million in venture debt. I think most recently a $100 million venture debt round. I think back in January, there's been a lot of talk on VC Twitter around venture debt, and not every company can pull it off. You really need to have strong cash flows to even pull that one off. And talk to us a little bit about your personal experience and understanding of venture debt and which companies should go that venture debt route.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, for us, that was something that we learned to operate with ServerStack. The first initial set of servers we would buy for cash. And the problem that we would run into is that, back then, and still to this day, I mean, servers are expensive. And typically speaking, if you buy a server for X dollars, you're not going to pay back that server in the first month. You'll pay it back over a short period of time, but not in a month. So if we wanted to grow our business and we were getting more customers than we could afford servers for by buying for cash, we had no choice but to go and get debt. At the scale that we were then, it was very nice because Dell has an entirely separate financial services arm, which will lease you the servers, which was a model that worked very well for us because then we can lease the servers for a monthly cost. It also worked well for us from an accounting perspective because we were reselling those servers to customers for a monthly cost. So it allowed us to keep really clear accounting because we could see very clearly, here's how much revenue we get from the server, here's how much the server costs, and as long as the revenue was higher than the server costs, we were doing well. So why not let's not turn down a customer. Let's take out some debt and get that customer online. So when it came time to DigitalOcean, we were already using debt through ServerStack to fund the business, but we quickly realized as DigitalOcean hit product market fit that the amount of debt that we would need to take on would be more than any debt lender would be comfortable with. So Dell was okay with us as ServerStack because our debt load was growing very slowly. We had a long payment history. Probably the first thing we did was just one server, then maybe we did 3 servers. So it was just a very gradual process. But with DigitalOcean, it was a very rapid process. That's part of the reason why we needed to get investors, because we needed to have other people that basically vouch for our business. So various lending parties, whether it was Dell or banks or whoever else, would feel comfortable with that. And I think in the long term, if we think about the investment that we got during the Series seed round and what we sold that equity for and what that equity is potentially worth today, I mean, wow, it's a lot of money. And that's money that you could have had in your pocket, but now your investor has it, right? So for us, that was just part of how we always operated. So it just seemed like a natural extension. Why raise equity then to go buy servers when there's already a system in place to provide that facility for you? And server costs would be something that we have basically for the entire history of our business, because as our cloud grows, our server capacity will need to grow with it. So we were just always operating in that capacity. And certainly in hindsight, I mean, it's pretty obvious that in certain cases it works well. The places where I wouldn't use venture debt is something like advertising, anything that I would use debt if it's part of your cost structure. So if you have basically your margin structure, here's what your cost of goods sold is, and you can take the cost of goods sold and put some debt behind it, then absolutely it works well, as long as you make sure your margins are good and your customers are happy. And certainly you have to have higher cash flows, and there's definitely more stringent accounting that's required. So we started doing audits from big audit firms very early in our history, because the banks just need that level of visibility to make sure that your books are good. But in many ways, that's very good hygiene for a company to have. So the debt allowed us to grow faster. The debt forced us to be more financially responsible. I mean, we were always financially responsible because we had come from a bootstrapping background, so we always spent money as if it was our own. And so for us, it just allowed us to build a more financially solid company pretty early on, with a lot of financial controls in place, because they were just a requirement for taking out the kind of debt that we needed to run the business.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense that in an asset-heavy company where you can also collateralize some of the debt with these server assets and prefer debt over equity, it makes a lot of sense to me. So in the last segment, I want to move on to scaling DigitalOcean. And so you've scaled this from a really early stage startup, bootstrapped environment even, to a company with more than 500 employees and service across the world. Talk to us a little bit about the challenges in scaling up. Culturally, financially, I mean, we don't have to cover it all, but what's the top of the mind challenge?
When we started DigitalOcean, I told the other guys, look, I can't promise you that we're going to be a successful business, but I can certainly promise you we'll learn something in the process. I think this entire category of scaling your business has been a tremendous learning process, because our other business grew to be about 20-ish employees. 500 employees is very different. The scale and the rapid nature of that growth is also different. And yeah, I mean, I think probably the three biggest lessons that are just hour-long topics in and of themselves is people, process, and culture. And each one is very distinct. I think culture is probably, it's hard to say that one is more critical than the other, because they really are all intertwined and they all kind of overlap. It's the same thing like product and marketing. The best product and marketing are when those two areas are kind of completely intertwined. So with culture, I mean, number one, you have to have consistency. You have to have consistency between your founding team. What are the values that you hold individually, and how are those values going to get integrated into the company? I think a lot of challenges that we had in DigitalOcean culturally is that individually we did not hold the same values. But when we would try to bring those values into the company, a lot of employees would get different messages depending on who they spoke to. So if they spoke to me, they'd hear one version. If they spoke to Ben, they would hear a different version. And that lack of consistency makes it very hard for people to know how to operate and to know what is expected of them and to know what is a good job and also to know what's a bad job, right? Because the last thing that any employee wants to do is to do something and then realize, hey, I did the wrong thing. So that was definitely a challenge. I think the second part of it is definitely process. And this process that arises naturally. You start off. I mean, literally, I sat in the middle. Jeff was on one side. Alec was on the other side. The project management was in my head because I could just poke each one, and we could build stuff. But naturally, when you get to 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 engineers, you have to put some process in place. And you start off with, back in the day, we actually used Pivotal Tracker, we used Basecamp and Trello and everything under the sun. But the same thing also happens in your business as you go to more employees. And I think more critically, the interface of culture and process. And I don't mean the routine process, whether it be stand-ups or whatever else, but I mean process that's in service of your culture. So if your culture is to show love to the customer. Okay, that's a nice phrase, but what does it mean? And what is the process that you have in place that encourages employees to have that conversation or to review their work, or more importantly, to call out senior leadership or anyone else at the company if we're falling behind on making that commitment to our customers. So I think that's a really critical component of understanding it. The third part, which has probably been the biggest lesson as well, is the people side. And I think there's numerous transitions that a company goes through in its founding journey, and they're all pretty much the same. But if you don't have outside mentors that kind of guide you through it, you end up making the same mistakes that everybody else made in that journey. So usually early on in your history, a lot of companies will have the same thing where you attract a certain type of people, a certain type of talent, which become instrumental to how you build things. We had so many individuals who joined us along the journey, whether it was Attell who built that community, Edward built that customer success, Zach built that customer support. You just have these people that come in that take on a greater role and a greater weight than what they look like on their resume. But at a certain point, you reach a certain scale and you're trying to bring in the grown-ups, as it were. And that's where you start to get a bit of conflict. And you certainly get people where their main focus is not your company. Those early people, they joined you not because they needed a job. They joined you because your company was an ideal version of what they wanted to work for. There was a greater mission and calling in what they did. And they got to express that through their work at your company. And then once you start to get the seasoned executives, sometimes you're not their first choice. Sometimes you're a stepping stone in their career or whatever else. And that creates a lot of internal politicking. And again, that goes back to your culture and your process. If you have a culture that is set and you have a process that then lays that culture out for people, once you bring in these other people into your equation, you already have stuff in place that kind of keeps the ship pointing in the right direction. If you don't have it in place, then the ship will naturally start to wander off course and you're obviously going to make mistakes. And it's also going to become more challenging to recover because all of your problems become one-off. So you keep dealing with the same issue and over again, but you have to do it from scratch rather than having a process which naturally highlights that issue before it becomes critical. And, I think the most challenging part is just learning how to scale individually and scale people at your company and have people hired over you and et cetera and so forth. And that's a personal journey as well. So everybody's going to react to it differently. And all of us are individuals, and sometimes the hardest lessons we learn are not ones that we want to learn. They're probably lessons that we're refusing to learn, but they're probably important ones. So I think there's a myriad of things that happen there. The only advice that I can give in a small snippet is if you're going through that, you're not alone. Pretty much every other company has gone through it. Maybe one or two in the history of tech startups got this all right without screwing it up, but everybody else, we've screwed it up in our own different ways. And the simple advice is find a mentor that has done it, that can guide you through it so that whatever mistakes you make are going to be individual to your company rather than architectural mistakes that somebody could have just helped you avoid really early on by saying, hey, just do this, do that. I can't tell you the answer, but I can give you a process and a structure. So I think just once you start hitting that phase, get a mentor that you trust so that you could have those conversations.
Yeah, that's super interesting. If I can sum it up, These are really the internal scaling up challenges, people, culture, and process. But one thing I want to talk about as well are the external scale up challenges, in particular competition. And so everybody knows that Netflix lives on AWS, and AWS is really the Amazon cash cow. But it has gotten a lot of competition with from the other tech giants, GCP and Microsoft in particular. And so DigitalOcean has, in the beginning, really grown from this initial fan base of developers and startups and smaller businesses. So talk to us a little bit how, now that it's at scale-up mode, how the competitive landscape really looks like.
The benefit for us is that we entered Amazon's space and not the other way around. So AWS was already massive and doing billions of dollars in revenue. So we we had no misconceptions about how big Amazon was. We thought that for what they did, they were fantastic. And we even spoke about this in various meetings or pitches or whatever else. Even at Techstars, they asked us for what our differentiation is, and I said love. That's because I couldn't say with a straight face that 2.5 engineers, me being the half, were going to beat Amazon's 10,000 engineers. That just doesn't make sense. So I think from a competitive landscape, we entered Amazon space. So if we could survive and thrive while they were already there, then in some ways we were inoculated from them because we came to where they were, rather than a lot of companies which end up doing something. I think Netflix is a good example because now Netflix is in competition with Amazon Prime, right? So Amazon entered their space. So I think that's, if you have to worry about Amazon, it's best that you enter their space directly, because if you can survive with all of that, then you'll probably be okay, rather than worrying that one day they're going to come after you. I think that for us, Google and Microsoft entering the conversation is also great, because Microsoft and Google are going to give Amazon a bigger worry than little DigitalOcean on the side. So I think in many ways, that's also good news for us. And ultimately, the way we look at the space is that, if you're building this hyperscale company that's going to go from zero to the next Facebook in 12 months, look, you're going to use AWS, you're going to use GCP, because that's where your infrastructure makes sense. But if you want the same building blocks, but without that complexity, then you would go to DigitalOcean. So we always saw ourselves as kind of like, we build products for us. And we weren't building the next Facebook. We were just building something to make it easier to get your code online. And so we really see ourselves as a small to medium-sized business player. And it's not even, and the thing of it is that even the SMB definition is not accurate, because to me, it always comes down to, I almost think of it as a medium complexity of infrastructure. Because you can actually have a massive business, but your infrastructure complexity is small, and then DigitalOcean is actually a great use for you. You might have a really small business, but your complexity is super high, and then you have to use somebody like AWS. So I think even that definition gets a little bit challenging. But in terms of competitive landscape, I think, like I said, we entered their space, we survived and done well. And so for us, really our focus is on the other startups, because they are where we were 5-6 years ago. And we were entering a competitive space even on the lower end of not these hyperscale companies. So that's really where my focus is, looking at the other companies that are starting today, where we're seen as the incumbent or the bigger company, and then really worrying about what trends are we missing, what workflows are we missing, are we getting a little bit disconnected from our original mission of taking care of customers and developers. And that's really the stuff that I worry about, and that's what keeps me up at night. I don't really worry about Amazon. Look, I think that they're great at what they do, and I think we're great at what we do. But what I want to make sure is that we take care of our customers and make them happy. So for me, I don't see that as AWS. I see that as other startups that are really the ones that are keeping us up at night.
Absolutely, I love that. And I posted tonight that in my indie hackers group that I'm going to interview you, and I got like a resounding echo that they were all saying this is the greatest product out there. So it's definitely still resonating with the developer community. And so a last question I want to ask you, in these current COVID-19 and Corona crisis, I think the cloud infrastructure providers are in many ways an unsung hero in enabling this work from home and social distancing.
Definitely a very challenging time that we're in. I think there's a couple of different perspectives. I mean, there's definitely the macroeconomic perspective, which is, if the government does not step in across the board, we're going to have problems because this is really a never before seen situation. It's almost the equivalent of the GDP of the world is going to stop for 2 to 3 months. And when I think about America in particular, there's so many people that live here that don't have even 1 month of savings, that they can't be out of work for 1 month. And likewise, as a small and medium business, and when we started our original company, there's a lot of businesses that are fantastic businesses that can't go through 1, 2, 3 months of 0 or 80% reduced revenue. So I think number one is that the governments will have to step in to mitigate this, and they are, which is fantastic, because this isn't a speculation in the market. This isn't fraud. This is just something that is beyond all of us. And I think the reality is that this has been going on for so long. Human beings have always been exposed to viruses, but I think it's been such a long time until something really global has truly happened. And you talk about the Spanish flu of 1918. I mean, we've had outbreaks, but nothing that has really created this sort of disruption. I think from the cloud perspective and the remote work perspective, I mean that's really that's the area that is, I don't want to say immune, because no one's going to be immune if the entire world economy is affected. But certainly, I think this has put a lot of focus on remote work. I think it's put a lot of focus on infrastructure providers and just the tools that we use that allow us to do that. I mean, even you and I talking, I mean, that's part of that whole value chain that we have. I think internally, at DigitalOcean, what we've been doing is a half of our company, over half the company is remote to begin with. So that has definitely been a benefit. And certainly, we're headquartered in New York. So, we kind of had to take pretty serious measures because that is the largest breakout center in America. And for us, because our company is 50% remote, it's a lot easier to go fully remote because everybody's already used to how those meetings are structured and we have all the tools in place. So I think companies that had a very large remote presence had an easier time transitioning because they were already doing it. And then everybody doing it is not, you kind of feel there's a more personal challenge where if you have kids and you're working from home and they start knocking on your door saying, dad or mom, play with me. I mean, because they're also out of school now, right? Everybody's kind of locked away at home. I think it's more of a personal challenge. But, for us on the infrastructure side as well, I mean, our biggest challenge is really about the physical presence because, we can switch the company remotely pretty easily, but we still have a physical footprint and we still have servers and we do still have logistics and supply chains, and we still do have people on staff and also remotely that install the servers. And that's really that is something that requires a physical presence, and that's really a worry, right? And both not really from a revenue perspective, but from a personal perspective, because if somebody has to go on site somewhere, they're putting themselves in harm's way, and that's not really a great situation. And so it's been a challenge, but I think for us, because of our remote nature by default, we've certainly weathered that pretty well. And I think it's also unique because when everybody has to go remote, it also allows people who don't normally work remote to not only empathize, but just see what the other side looks like. And it's interesting because a lot of people can have certain biases that they might not realize, but when they're on the other side of it, they get that empathy and they see there's some benefits they see immediately, there's some negatives, but now we're all in the same boat, so we can adjust to each other better, as opposed to there's a part of the company that's remote and a part of the company that's not, and maybe we're not having that kind of alignment with each other, and then when everybody goes remote, it becomes very different. So I think ultimately it's going to have a lot of companies rethink how they're laid out and rethink kind of their office plans because, I mean, it's been obvious for a while that remote is fantastic if you can make it work, and it really increases your talent pool. And I think just, there's some businesses that might be from an operational level having a harder time dealing with going remote only. So I think it's almost going to become a precautionary measure that you just have to be good at it because, we don't know how this will play out a year from now or 2 years from now. I mean, I certainly hope that we get through the worst of it and we're going to be fine, but it would be foolish not to prepare for something like this in the future again, because it's more likely to happen than not.
So Moisey, thank you so much for being with us here today. And where can people find out more about you and get in touch with you or follow what you're up to?
Yeah, I mean, pretty easy. Find me on Twitter, Moisey Uretzky, just my full name on Twitter. I'm a pretty easy person to get a hold of. If you need to get a hold of me, I'm sure you'll find it. You can figure out my email address. It's not too complicated. Yes, I still respond to everything. Yes, I still read everything. So anybody who needs to find me is it's not that challenging.
Thank you so much, Moisey, for being with us. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot.